In the glass towers of downtown's financial district, a dedicated architect was about to close the biggest deal of her career. What started as a routine contract signing took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a calculated betrayal that would destroy everything she'd built. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical junior architect, having spent 8 years designing award-winning buildings and nurturing client relationships with unwavering integrity. When she encountered Richard Blackstone's systematic campaign to destroy her reputation, her decision to fight back would lead to a federal investigation that toppled one of the city's most powerful firms. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany desk gleamed under the afternoon light streaming through James Morrison's corner office windows, casting warm shadows across the contract that would change everything. Sarah Mitchell smoothed her navy blazer and smiled at the elderly gentleman across from her. His weathered hands folded patiently as she reviewed the final details of the acquisition agreement. 8 years at Blackstone and Associates had led to this moment: the Meridian Building, a century-old architectural gem in the heart of downtown, would finally have the respectful restoration it deserved. "You've done exceptional work on this, Miss Mitchell," Morrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built his modest empire through handshake deals and unwavering principles. "I've been in this business for 43 years, and I can count on one hand the number of brokers who truly understand what this building means." Sarah felt the familiar warmth of validation, the same feeling that had driven her through countless 16-hour days and sleepless nights. Growing up in Akron, Ohio, she'd watched her father work double shifts at the steel plant while her mother cleaned offices downtown, both of them dreaming of something better for their daughter. That dream sat in front of her now, a $12 million deal that would cement her reputation as one of the city's premier commercial real estate brokers. "Mr. Morrison, it's been an honor working with you on this project," Sarah replied, her pen poised above the signature line. "Blackstone and Associates is committed to ensuring the Meridian Building's restoration honors its historical significance while maximizing its commercial potential." She'd rehearsed those words a dozen times, but they felt hollow now. The truth was she'd fallen in love with the building herself during the months of negotiations. Built in 1923, the Meridian had housed everything from a department store to artists' studios, its Art Deco facade telling stories of the city's golden age. Morrison's vision for its future: boutique offices for local businesses, a gallery space, a cafe that would bring life back to the neighborhood, aligned perfectly with her own hopes for thoughtful urban development. Her phone buzzed against the desk. Sarah glanced at it reflexively, expecting a congratulatory message from Elena Rodriguez, her assistant, or perhaps David Blackstone checking on the closing. Instead, her blood turned to ice as she read the sender's name: Richard Blackstone. "Effective immediately? You're terminated. Security will escort you out." The words blurred as Sarah stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process their meaning. She read the message again, then a third time, each repetition hitting her like a physical blow. No explanation, no phone call, no consideration for the fact that she was literally in the middle of closing the biggest deal of her career. "Miss Mitchell, is everything all right?" Morrison's concerned voice seemed to come from underwater. Sarah looked up, her professional mask still in place despite the earthquake happening beneath it. 8 years. 8 years of building relationships, cultivating clients, generating millions in revenue for the firm. She'd sacrificed friendships, romantic relationships, and countless weekends for Blackstone and Associates. She'd been the first one in the office every morning and the last to leave most nights. And this was how it ended? A text message while she was about to sign a contract worth more than most people would see in a lifetime? The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Richard Blackstone had smiled at her just yesterday, praising her work on the Morrison deal. He'd shaken her hand and told her she was invaluable to the firm. Meanwhile, He'd been planning this moment, waiting until she was vulnerable, exposed, representing his company in front of a client. Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she held the pen. She could see Morrison watching her with growing concern, probably wondering if she was having some kind of breakdown. Her mind raced through the implications. She had no job, no income, no way to pay her mortgage or her student loans that still haunted her from business school. Worse, she'd have to explain to Morrison that the deal might fall through, that she couldn't represent Blackstone and Associates because she was no longer part of the company. But then something shifted inside her, a steel core that her working-class parents had forged through their own struggles. Sarah looked at the contract, at Morrison's expectant face, at the pen in her hand. In that split second, a voice in her head, part desperation, part fury, part pure instinct, whispered a dangerous thought. What if you don't have to explain anything? Without allowing herself to think about the consequences, Sarah drew a careful line through Blackstone and Associates, wherever it appeared on the signature page. Her handwriting was steady as she wrote Mitchell Acquisitions LLC in its place. She signed her name with the same confident flourish she'd used on hundreds of other deals, then slid the contract across the desk to Morrison. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. Mitchell Acquisitions is honored to represent you in this transaction. Morrison's weathered face broke into a genuine smile as he signed his own name. You know, Miss Mitchell, I have to say, I'm glad it's your company handling this and not some large firm. There's something to be said for working with someone who has real skin in the game. He stood and extended his hand. I look forward to a long relationship with Mitchell Acquisitions. As they shook hands, Sarah felt the full weight of what she'd just done crash over her. She'd committed fraud, or something close to it. She'd signed a legally binding contract representing a company that didn't exist, using credentials she no longer possessed. But Morrison's grip was firm and warm, his eyes bright with satisfaction, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel proud of what they'd accomplished together. I'll have my assistant process the paperwork and arrange the wire transfer. Within the next 48 hours, Sarah heard herself saying, her voice remarkably calm. Elena Rodriguez will be your primary point of contact going forward. Elena. Sweet, loyal Elena, who'd been by her side for 3 years, who'd stayed late every night this week to prepare for today's closing. How was she going to explain this? How was she going to explain any of this? Morrison gathered his copies of the contract and smiled at her one more time. Thank you again, Miss Mitchell. I have a good feeling about this partnership. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the borrowed conference room, staring at her copy of the contract. The letterhead now read, Mitchell Acquisitions LLC, a company that existed only in her imagination and on this piece of paper. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Elena's number, her finger hovering over the call button. What had she done? In a moment of wounded pride and desperate anger, she'd potentially destroyed her career, exposed herself to lawsuits, and dragged Elena into a mess that could ruin them both. But as she looked at the contract again, at Morrison's satisfied signature next to her own, she felt something unexpected alongside the fear, a tiny spark of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, she'd done something extraordinary. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she finally pressed Elena's number. It rang once, twice, and then she heard the familiar voice of the one person who might understand why she'd just bet everything on a company that didn't exist. Sarah? How did the closing go? I've been waiting by the phone all afternoon. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Elena, we need to talk. Can you meet me? And you might want to sit down for this conversation. 20 minutes. Later, Sarah sat in her black sedan outside Morrison's building, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The contract lay on the passenger seat beside her, the words, Mitchell Acquisitions LLC, seeming to mock her with each glance. Her chest felt tight, as if someone had wrapped steel bands around her ribs and was slowly tightening them. What have I done? The question echoed in her mind like a broken record. She'd built her entire career on meticulous planning, careful analysis, and calculated risks. This wasn't calculated. This was pure, reckless desperation disguised as confidence. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the spinning in her head. Her phone rang, Elena's name flashing on the screen. "Sarah, I'm in the parking lot. Where are you?" "Black sedan, northeast corner." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, hollow and distant. Elena appeared at the passenger door within seconds, her dark hair pulled back in its usual practical ponytail, concern etched across her features. She slid into the passenger seat, immediately sensing something was catastrophically wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Elena said, studying Sarah's pale face. "What happened in there? Did Morrison back out?" "No, he signed." Sarah handed her the contract with trembling fingers. "But Elena, I need to tell you something, and it's going to sound insane." Elena scanned the document, her eyebrows furrowing as she processed what she was seeing. "Mitchell Acquisitions, LLC? I don't understand. Where's the Blackstone letterhead?" "Richard fired me." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Right before I was supposed to sign. A text message. No explanation, no warning, nothing. Just effective. Immediately you're terminated." Sarah's voice cracked on the last word. Elena's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, shock, then blazing anger. "He what? Right before the closing? That bastard!" "There's more." Sarah took a shuddering breath. "I didn't tell Morrison. I crossed out Blackstone's name and wrote in Mitchell Acquisitions instead. I signed a $12 million contract representing a company that doesn't exist." The silence in the car was deafening. Elena stared at the contract, then at Sarah, then back at the contract. Sarah braced herself for the lecture, the rational arguments, the inevitable abandonment when Elena realized how far off the deep end she'd gone. Instead, Elena started laughing. "Elena, this isn't funny." "Oh, honey, it's not funny at all," Elena said, wiping tears from her eyes. "It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." She turned to face Sarah fully. "Do you know what that man did to me last month when I asked for time off to take my son to his doctor's appointment? He told me that if family was more important than work, maybe I should find a job that better suited my priorities." Sarah had forgotten about that incident, buried as it was under the stress of closing the Morrison deal. But she remembered Elena's red-rimmed eyes the next morning, the way she'd thrown herself into work with renewed desperation. "And you remember Janet from accounting?" Elena continued. "The one who got fired last year for supposedly making errors in the expense reports?" "I saw those reports, Sarah. They were perfect. Richard just wanted someone younger, someone who wouldn't question the way he fudged the books." Elena pulled out her own phone, her fingers moving with determined purpose. "I'm calling in sick for the rest of the week." "No. You know what? I quit." She dialed the main office number. "Elena, wait. Hi, this is Elena Rodriguez. I need to speak with Mr. Blackstone." "Yes, I'll hold." She covered the phone with her hand. "Sarah, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to give that man exactly what he deserves. You just did it." "Elena, you can't quit. You have responsibilities. Your son." "My son deserves a mother who stands up for what's right." Elena held up a finger as Richard's voice came through the phone. "Mr. Blackstone, this is Elena Rodriguez. I'm calling to inform you that I'm resigning from my position effective immediately. No, I won't be giving 2 weeks' notice. Because I'm joining Mitchell Acquisitions, LLC." Elena ended the call and immediately turned her phone off. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of their breathing and the distant hum of traffic. "Elena, you don't understand what you just did." I understand perfectly. Elena's voice was steady, determined. I just quit the worst job I've ever had to join the best boss I've ever worked for. Now, what do we need to do to make Mitchell Acquisitions LLC a real company? Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over. We need to file incorporation papers, establish a business bank account, get a tax ID number, find office space. The list felt overwhelming, impossible. Okay, let's start with the state filing office. It's only 3:30. If we hurry, we can get the paperwork submitted today. Elena was already pulling up directions on her phone. What else? Elena, I don't have any money to start a company. I don't even know if I can legally do this after what I just signed. We'll figure it out. Elena reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand. Look, I've watched you work miracles for the past 3 years. You found buyers for properties that had been on the market for years. You negotiated deals that everyone said were impossible. You turned Blackstone from a mid-tier firm into one of the most respected agencies in the city. If anyone can build a company from nothing, it's you. Sarah stared at her friend. No, her partner now, feeling something shift inside her chest. The panic was still there, but underneath it was something else. A fierce, burning determination that she hadn't felt since her college days when she'd worked 3 jobs to pay for business school. We'll need a lawyer, Sarah said slowly, her mind beginning to organize itself around the enormity of the task ahead. I know someone, Marcus Webb. He handled my divorce. He's good, and he hates corporate bullies. As they pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the state offices, Sarah caught sight of the Blackstone and Associates building in her rearview mirror. Somewhere in that glass tower, Richard Blackstone was probably just discovering what she'd done. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that surprised her: anticipation. The war was about to begin. 3 days later, Sarah's 1-bedroom apartment looked like a hurricane had torn through an office supply store. Her dining table groaned under the weight of laptops, printers, file folders, and takeout containers. Extension cords snaked across the hardwood floor, connecting a makeshift network of equipment that hummed with urgent purpose. Elena sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by incorporation documents, her hair escaping its ponytail as she filled out form after form. Okay, we're officially a Delaware LLC as of yesterday, Elena announced, waving a certificate of incorporation like a victory flag. The business bank account should be active by tomorrow, and I've got us an appointment with the IRS for our tax ID number. Sarah looked up from her laptop, where she'd been designing a basic website for Mitchell Acquisitions. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. She'd barely slept since Monday's closing, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. What about office space? I found 3 possibilities. Elena consulted her notebook, which had become their unofficial Bible. There's a small suite in the Morrison building. Ironic, right? A shared workspace downtown, or we could sublease from that startup on 5th Street. The Morrison building. Sarah felt a flutter of something between anxiety and excitement. How small is small? 2 offices, a reception area, and a conference room. It's not much, but it's professional, and the rent is. Elena winced. Let's just say it's optimistic. Sarah's laptop chimed with an email notification. Her heart sank as she read the sender. Marcus Webb, the attorney Elena had recommended. They'd met with him yesterday, and his expression had grown increasingly grave as Sarah explained their situation. He wants to see us again today, Sarah said, her voice tight. That can't be good. Elena scrambled to her feet. Maybe he's figured out how to make this legal. Or maybe he's figured out how many years we'll spend in prison. An hour later, they sat in Marcus Webb's modest law office, watching him review a stack of documents with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. He was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe 40, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of wire-rimmed glasses that suggested countless late nights poring over legal briefs. His office reflected a man who'd traded big law prestige for principle. Functional furniture, law books with cracked spines, and a framed photo of him shaking hands with what looked like a grateful client. "Well," Marcus said finally, setting down the last document, "the good news is you're probably not going to prison." Sarah felt her shoulders drop with relief. "And the bad news?" "The bad news is that Richard Blackstone has already filed a cease and desist order claiming you fraudulently represented yourself as a Blackstone employee during the Morrison closing." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "He's also threatening to sue you for theft of corporate opportunities, breach of fiduciary duty, and about 6 other things I'm sure he's making up as he goes." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena leaned forward. "But Sarah wasn't a Blackstone employee when she signed that contract. He fired her first." "Exactly." Marcus smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. "That text message is the best evidence you could have. He terminated your employment relationship before you signed anything. Legally, you were a free agent." "But I used information I gathered while working for Blackstone," Sarah said. "The client relationship, the building details, the negotiation history. Information that was in your head, not in their files. And Morrison made it clear he wanted to work with you personally, not the firm." Marcus pulled out a yellow legal pad. "That said, we need to be strategic about this. Blackstone has deep pockets and a team of lawyers who bill more per hour than most people make in a week." Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it reflexively, then froze. "It's Morrison." "Answer it," Elena urged. "He's our client now. Mr. Morrison? How are you?" "Miss Mitchell, I'm calling because I received a rather disturbing phone call from Richard Blackstone this morning." Morrison's voice was carefully controlled, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. "He claims there are irregularities with our contract." Sarah's mouth went dry. "What kind of irregularities?" "He suggested that you may have misrepresented your authority to sign on behalf of Mitchell Acquisitions. I told him that seemed unlikely, given that it's your company, but he was quite insistent that there were problems." Elena was gesturing frantically, mouthing words Sarah couldn't understand. Marcus had gone very still, his pen hovering over his legal pad. "Mr. Morrison, I can assure you that everything about our contract is legitimate. Mitchell Acquisitions is properly incorporated and fully authorized to handle your transaction." "I'm sure it is, my dear, but I'm curious. When exactly did you start your company? Blackstone seemed to think you were still employed by them as recently as Monday." The moment of truth. Sarah looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly, then at Marcus, who was watching her with the intensity of a coach watching his quarterback throw a Hail Mary pass. "Mr. Morrison, I started Mitchell Acquisitions immediately after Richard Blackstone terminated my employment on Monday afternoon. I'd been considering going independent for some time, and his decision simply accelerated my timeline." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. "Miss Mitchell, in my 43 years in business, I've learned to recognize opportunity when I see it. I've also learned to recognize character." Morrison's voice warmed considerably. "Richard Blackstone's phone call this morning told me everything I need to know about his character. Your handling of this conversation tells me everything I need to know about yours." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'm looking forward to working with Mitchell Acquisitions for many years to come. And Miss Mitchell? When young Mr. Blackstone calls back, and he will, I'll be sure to tell him that my business relationship is with you, not with whatever firm you choose to work for." After Morrison hung up, the three of them sat in stunned silence. "Well," Marcus said finally, "I'd say you just gained a very powerful ally." Elena was grinning like she'd won the lottery. "Did you hear that? He basically told Richard Blackstone to go to hell." Sarah felt a smile tugging at her lips for the first time in days. But as she looked around Marcus's office, at the legal briefs, the case files, the evidence of countless battles fought and won, she realized they'd won this skirmish, but the war was just beginning. "Marcus, what do we do about the cease and desist?" His smile turned predatory. "We fight back." The process server appeared at Sarah's new office door at exactly 9:17 a.m. on Friday morning, his arrival timed with military precision to maximize psychological impact. Elena had just finished arranging their second-hand desk chairs when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to sound ominous. "Sarah Mitchell?" The server was young, probably fresh out of college, but his expression was apologetically professional. "I have legal documents for you." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the thick manila envelope. Through the glass partition of their modest office suite, she could see other tenants in the building glancing their way with curiosity. Nothing announced trouble quite like being served legal papers in public. "What is it?" Elena asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Sarah tore open the envelope, scanning the dense legal language until the key phrases jumped out at her. Breach of fiduciary duty, theft of corporate opportunities, fraudulent misrepresentation, monetary damages in excess of $10 million. $10 million? Elena's voice cracked. "How do they get $10 million? "They're claiming that my actions damaged their reputation and cost them future business opportunities." Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of Richard Blackstone's counterattack settling over her like a lead blanket. "This is what Marcus warned us about. They're trying to crush us before we can even get started." Her phone rang before she could fully process the implications. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. David. Blackstone, though he sounded strained and hesitant. "Sarah, we need to talk." "I don't think that's a good idea, David. Your father just sued me for $10 million. "That's why we need to talk. Can you meet me? Somewhere private?" Against her better judgment and Elena's visible disapproval, Sarah agreed to meet David at a small cafe several blocks from downtown. She arrived first, choosing a corner table where she could watch the entrance, her nerves taut as piano wire. When David walked in 20 minutes later, she barely recognized him. The confident, polished broker she'd known for years looked haggard, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "You look terrible," Sarah said as he slumped into the chair across from her. "I feel worse." David ordered coffee with shaking hands. "Sarah, I need you to know, I had nothing to do with the lawsuit. I didn't even know about it until this morning. But you knew about the firing." David's face flushed. "Not until after it happened. He called me into his office Wednesday morning and told me you'd been terminated for performance issues. When I asked for specifics, he said it was confidential. HR matter. Performance issues?" Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. "I generated more revenue for that firm than any broker in its history." "I know. That's when I started asking questions." David leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sarah, my father has been planning this for months. He's been documenting every conversation you had with clients, every email you sent, every deal you worked on. He's been building a case to get rid of you." The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. "Why?" David's laugh was bitter. "Because you're better at this than I am. Because you're better at this than he is. Because clients specifically ask for you instead of working with the Blackstone name." He paused, struggling with something. "And because he found out about us." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Their relationship, if it could even be called that, had been carefully professional in public, limited to a few dinners and one weekend trip that she'd convinced herself was just 2 colleagues getting to know each other better. "He had someone following us," David continued. "Photos, credit card receipts, everything. He said you were using me to get inside information about the firm's strategy. That's insane. We barely— I know. But it gave him the excuse he needed to position you as a threat to the family business. David pulled out a manila folder. These are copies of his files on you. I thought you should see what you're up against. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs of her and David at dinner, printouts of her client communications, detailed analyses of her deal structures, and most damaging of all, a psychological profile that painted her as ambitious, manipulative, and willing to do anything to advance her career. There's more, David said quietly. He's been calling your contacts throughout the industry, spreading rumors about your erratic behavior and questionable business practices. He's trying to poison the well before you can establish yourself? As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone began buzzing with calls from numbers she recognized. Potential clients, industry contacts, people who should have been celebrating her new venture. Instead, each call brought the same carefully worded concerns about recent allegations and potential legal complications. By the fourth call, a pattern had emerged. Each contact had received a call from Richard Blackstone or his representatives, raising questions about Sarah's integrity and suggesting that working with Mitchell Acquisitions could expose them to legal liability. He's destroying me, Sarah said, watching her phone continue to buzz with calls she was afraid to answer. Systematically destroying every relationship I've built over 8 years. There's something else. David's voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. He's planning to go after your financing for the Morrison deal. He's got connections at every major bank in the city, and he's going to make sure none of them will work with you. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. Without financing, she couldn't complete the Morrison purchase. Without completing that deal, Mitchell Acquisitions would collapse before it truly began, and she'd be personally liable for breach of contract. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. David was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. "Because I've watched my father destroy people before, and I've never said anything. Because I convinced myself it was just business, that they deserved it somehow." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Because I care about you, and I can't stand by and watch him do this to you." "David, if he finds out you warned me?" "He already suspects. He's had security monitoring my communications since Wednesday. I probably have about an hour before he figures out we met." Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Elena texting frantically. Morrison called. "He's worried about financing rumors. Says we need to talk ASAP." The noose was tightening. Richard Blackstone wasn't just attacking her legally. He was systematically dismantling every aspect of her business before she could establish it. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare, executed with the precision of someone who'd done this before. "I have to go," Sarah said, standing up. "Sarah, wait." David grabbed her hand. "There might be a way to fight back, but it would mean crossing. A line I can never uncross." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the privileged son of a real estate mogul, but a man being forced to choose between his family and his conscience. "What kind of line?" "The kind that would give you the ammunition to destroy my father, but it would also destroy my family." The war was escalating. The coffee shop on Fifth Avenue buzzed with the usual morning rush, but Sarah barely noticed the chaos around her. She sat hunched over her laptop, scrolling through another rejection email from a potential client. 3 weeks since the Blackstone defamation campaign began, and her business was hemorrhaging faster than she could stanch the wounds. Sarah Mitchell? She looked up to find a woman in her early 30s, sharp-eyed with auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Designer? Glasses perched on her nose, but her jeans and leather jacket suggested someone who valued substance over style. "I'm Amanda Kim from the Financial Tribune. I'd like to talk." Sarah's stomach dropped. Another journalist wanting to pick at the bones of her professional carcass. I'm not interested in... Richard Blackstone has a pattern. Amanda slid into the opposite chair uninvited. This isn't the first time he's systematically destroyed a competitor's reputation. I think you might be interested in what I've found. Despite herself, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. What kind of pattern? Amanda opened her tablet, showing Sarah a spreadsheet filled with names and dates. 7 former employees of Blackstone and associates in the past 5 years, all left under suspicious circumstances. All had their professional reputations subsequently attacked through anonymous tips to industry publications, negative online reviews, and whisper campaigns. Sound familiar? Sarah's pulse quickened as she scanned the list. She recognized 2 of the names, architects who'd simply vanished from the industry after brief, promising careers. How did you... I started looking into Blackstone after hearing rumors at the AIA convention. Your situation was just the tip of the iceberg. Amanda leaned forward. These people were silenced by fear, lawsuits, or financial ruin, but you're still fighting. That makes you interesting. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. Elena's name appeared on the screen. I need to take this, Sarah said, stepping away from the table. Sarah, we need to meet. Elena's voice was tight with urgency. I found something big. An hour later, Sarah sat in Elena's car in the parking lot of a suburban strip mall, staring at the documents spread across the dashboard. Bank statements, tax filings, internal memos, all bearing the Blackstone and Associates letterhead. He's been shifting project costs between different LLC subsidiaries to minimize tax liability, Elena explained, her voice barely above a whisper. Some of these write-offs, they're completely fabricated. The Morrison Hotel project alone has phantom expenses totaling over $2 million. Sarah felt sick. The information was damning, potentially criminal, but using it would mean crossing a line she'd never imagined approaching. Elena, how did you get these? Richard's been sloppy lately, distracted by his campaign against you. He left his office unlocked during the partners' meeting last week, and She trailed off, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. I know it was wrong, but after what he did to me, what he's doing to you, this could destroy him, Sarah said quietly, studying the documents. But it could also destroy us. This is theft, Elena. Corporate espionage. Is it worse than what he's doing? To you, to all of us. Sarah's phone rang before she could answer. Marcus Webb's name flashed on the screen. Sarah, where are you? We need to talk. Now. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Marcus in his office, watching him pace behind his desk like a caged animal. They're offering to settle, he said without preamble. Full retraction of all statements, public apology, and financial compensation. How much? Enough to rebuild your practice, maybe even expand it. He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. Sarah, this is a good offer. Better than good. It's a miracle. What's the catch? You agree to never speak publicly about Blackstone and Associates or Richard Blackstone, ever, and you accept full responsibility for the initial project delays that started this whole mess. Sarah felt the weight of Elena's stolen documents in her purse. She could end this right now, walk away with enough money to start over, her reputation intact if not enhanced. All she had to do was lie about what really happened and promise to stay silent about Richard's true nature. I need time to think. Sarah. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. I've seen what prolonged litigation does to people. Even if we win, and that's a big if, you'll spend the next 2 years bleeding money and watching your practice die. This settlement is your lifeline. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment, Elena's documents spread across her dining table. Amanda Kim's business card lay beside them, along with Marcus's settlement offer. 3 paths forward, each requiring her to compromise something she'd once considered sacred. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Found 3 more victims, one willing to go on record. Coffee tomorrow? Sarah stared at the message, then at the tax documents, then at the settlement offer. She thought about the architects whose careers had been destroyed, about Elena's frightened face, about the clients who'd trusted her with their dreams only to have them weaponized against her. She picked up her phone and typed a response to Amanda. Yes, and I have something you need to see. Then she called Marcus. I'm not taking the settlement, she said when he answered. Sarah, please reconsider. This isn't just about money. You're right. It's not about money. It's about making sure he can't do this to anyone else. The silence stretched between them before Marcus spoke again, his voice heavy with concern. Then we'd better be prepared for war, because that's what this just became. As Sarah hung up, she realized she'd crossed her own line in the sand. She was no longer just defending herself. She was going on the attack. The question now was whether she could live with the person she was becoming or if fighting monsters would turn her into one herself. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars, beautiful and distant. She'd spent her career building things, creating spaces where people could live and work and dream. Now she was about to tear something down. The weight of that decision settled on her shoulders as she gathered Elena's documents, preparing for the battle that would define not just her career, but her conscience. The Financial Tribune's newsroom hummed with deadline energy as Amanda Kim stared at her computer screen, reading Sarah's email for the 3rd time. The attached documents were explosive: tax fraud, fabricated expenses, systematic financial manipulation, spanning years. But something felt wrong. Too clean, she muttered, scrolling through the bank statements. In her 8 years of investigative journalism, she'd learned that real corruption was messy, inconsistent. These documents told a perfect story of malfeasance, almost as if they'd been curated. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Mitchell. Amanda? Did you get the files? We need to move fast before— Where did you get these? Amanda interrupted. Silence stretched across the line. Does it matter? You said you wanted to expose him. It matters because I'm not publishing stolen documents without verification. Meet me at the Tribune building in an hour. And Sarah? Bring whoever gave you these. Amanda hung up and immediately called her editor. If she was going to stake her reputation on this story, she needed backup. An hour later, Sarah sat in Amanda's cramped office beside a nervous Elena Vasquez, whose hands shook as she sipped cold coffee. Amanda had spent the intervening time running background checks and making calls to sources in the financial sector. Elena, I need you to walk me through exactly how you obtained these documents, Amanda said, her recorder app visible on her phone. Elena's story came out in fragments. Late nights, unlocked offices, a USB drive hidden in her purse. With each detail, Amanda's concerns deepened. The documents were real, but the method of acquisition could destroy any legal case and her own credibility. There's something else, Elena whispered. The Morrison Hotel project, the one where Sarah supposedly caused delays. Richard deliberately sabotaged the permits. Sarah's head snapped up. What? He had contacts at the city planning office. The delays weren't your fault. They were orchestrated to give him grounds to terminate the contract and damage your reputation. Amanda leaned forward. Can you prove that? Elena nodded, pulling out her phone. I recorded a conversation between Richard and Councilman Torres. They were laughing about how easy it was to teach the ambitious architect a lesson. The audio was damning. Richard's voice, clear and unmistakable, describing how he'd manipulated the permit process to create delays that never should have happened. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her as months of self-doubt and guilt evaporated. He destroyed my reputation over a lie, Sarah said, her voice barely controlled. Everything I've been through, every client I've lost, it was all based on a fabrication. Amanda studied the two women. Sarah's rage was palpable, Elena's fear almost toxic. The story was bigger than she'd imagined, but it was also more dangerous. "I need to verify this independently," Amanda said. "Elena, this recording is inadmissible in court," came a voice from the doorway. Marcus Webb stood there, his face grim. "Sarah, you didn't answer my calls. I had to track you down through your assistant." Sarah's cheeks flushed. "Marcus, you promised to keep me informed of any developments." His eyes swept the room, taking in Elena's terrified expression and Amanda's recording equipment. "What exactly is happening here?" Amanda quickly explained the situation while Marcus listened, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he sat heavily in the remaining chair. "Elena, that recording makes you a target," he said quietly. "If Blackstone discovers you have it, he'll destroy you legally and professionally. And Sarah," he turned to her, "using stolen documents and illegal recordings changes everything. You're no longer just a plaintiff in a defamation case. You're potentially a co-conspirator in corporate espionage." "But the recording proves I was right," Sarah protested. "It proves everything." "It proves Richard is corrupt, yes, but it also proves you've been working with someone who violated attorney-client privilege, stole confidential documents, and recorded conversations without consent." Marcus rubbed his temples. "The legal exposure here is staggering." Amanda looked between them. "What if we could verify the information through other sources? Make Elena's evidence corroborating rather than primary?" Marcus shook his head. "Any investigation that leads back to stolen documents is poisoned fruit. No ethical attorney would touch this case." "Then we don't make it a legal case," Sarah said suddenly. "We make it a public one." The room fell silent. Elena looked terrified. Marcus appeared ready to argue, and Amanda felt the familiar thrill of a story that could change everything. "Amanda, you said you found other victims. What if we could get them to come forward, not with Elena's documents, but with their own experiences?" Amanda nodded slowly. "I've been building a database of Blackstone's pattern of retaliation. 7 confirmed cases over 5 years. If even 3 of them agreed to go on record, you'd have a pattern of behavior that doesn't rely on stolen evidence," Marcus said, his legal mind already working through the implications. "It's still dangerous. Blackstone has resources to fight back in ways you can't imagine." Sarah stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the busy street below. People hurried past, unaware that a decision being made in this small office could change everything. She thought about the architects whose careers had been destroyed, about Elena's courage in coming forward, about the clients who'd trusted her with their dreams. "Elena," she said, turning back to the room, "I won't ask you to do anything that puts you at risk. But if you're willing to tell your story, not about the documents, but about what it was like to work for Richard, what you witnessed." "I'll do it," Elena said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. "He's hurt too many people. It has to stop." Amanda felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with a breaking story. "I'll need a week to contact the other victims and verify details independently. Can you both stay quiet until then?" Sarah nodded, but Marcus looked skeptical. "1 week. But if Blackstone gets wind of this investigation, all bets are off. Sarah, you're placing your entire future on the hope that journalism can accomplish what the legal system cannot." As they prepared to leave, Elena grabbed Sarah's arm. "I'm sorry I got you into this deeper than you intended. But I'm not sorry I came forward. Some things are more important than our careers." Walking out into the afternoon sun, Sarah realized Elena was right. This had stopped being about her reputation or her business. It was about something larger: the abuse of power, the silencing of voices, the corruption that thrived in shadows. The battle was no longer just professional. It was personal, moral, and very public. and there was no going back. The Financial Tribune's headline screamed across every newsstand in the city. Pattern of retaliation. How one architecture firm systematically destroyed competitors. Sarah's hands trembled as she read Amanda's article on her phone, sitting in her car outside the courthouse where her final hearing was scheduled in 2 hours. 3 former Blackstone employees had gone on record. 2 competing architects detailed systematic campaigns that destroyed their practices. The pattern was undeniable, meticulously documented without relying on Elena's stolen evidence. Amanda had done what seemed impossible, built an ironclad case using only legitimate sources. Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. Reporters, former clients, industry colleagues, everyone wanted a statement. She'd become the face of something much larger than her individual fight. Sarah. Marcus appeared at her passenger door, looking haggard. "We need to talk before the hearing." She let him in, noting the dark circles under his eyes. He'd spent the week fielding calls from Blackstone's army of attorneys, all demanding to know if Sarah had provided Amanda with stolen documents. "Richard's desperate," Marcus said without preamble. "His lawyers are claiming the Tribune article is based on your leaked documents. They're pushing for criminal charges against you and Elena." Sarah's stomach dropped. But Amanda didn't use Elena's evidence. "They don't care. The timing makes it look connected." Marcus pulled out his tablet, showing her legal filings from that morning. "They're also claiming the other victims were coached by you and Amanda to lie. It's scorched earth, Sarah. They're trying to destroy everyone before this gets to trial." Through the courthouse steps, Sarah could see news vans gathering. What had started as a private legal dispute was becoming a public spectacle. The architecture community, usually insular and discreet, was being forced into the spotlight. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly. "I got a call from David Chen this morning. Sarah's former client, the Morrison Hotel project that had started everything. He wants to testify. After reading Amanda's article, he realized the permit delays weren't your fault. He's furious about being manipulated into terminating your contract." For the first time in months, Sarah felt genuine hope. Will the judge allow it? "If we can prove relevance, yes. But Sarah," Marcus grabbed her arm, "David also told me something disturbing. Richard approached him last week, before the article came out. Offered him a significant discount on future projects if he'd sign an affidavit stating you were incompetent." The hope curdled into something darker. "David refused?" "He did. But it means Richard knew this was coming. Someone tipped him off. About Amanda's investigation." Sarah's phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah immediately knew something was wrong. "Sarah, I'm at the hospital." Elena's voice was shaky. "Someone broke into my apartment last night. They took my laptop, my files, everything related to Blackstone." "Are you hurt?" "Bruised, scared, but alive. The police say it was probably a random burglary, but nothing else was taken. Just my work materials." Elena paused. "Sarah, I don't think I can testify today. I'm too frightened." Sarah closed her eyes. Without Elena's testimony about the toxic work environment and Richard's pattern of retaliation, their case became much weaker. The stolen documents had been ruled inadmissible, but Elena's first-hand account of Richard's behavior had been crucial to establishing his character. "Elena, I understand. Your safety comes first." After hanging up, Sarah stared at the courthouse. 20 minutes until the hearing that would determine her professional future. The article had vindicated her publicly, but legal vindication required evidence admissible in court. "We can still win this," Marcus said, though his voice lacked conviction. "David's testimony about the Morrison Hotel manipulation is powerful. The Tribune article establishes a pattern, even if we can't use it directly as evidence." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "Emergency. Check your email." Now. The email contained a single attachment, a video file sent from an anonymous account. Sarah opened it and gasped. The footage showed Richard Blackstone in his office, clearly taken by a hidden camera. The timestamp was from the previous week, and the audio was crystal clear. "Told you to handle the architect problem quietly," Richard was saying to someone off camera. "Now we have reporters sniffing around, former employees talking to journalists. This could destroy everything we've built." "What about Elena Vasquez?" came another voice Sarah didn't recognize. "She's been neutralized, but the journalist and Mitchell are still problems. See what you can do about making their lives more difficult." The video ended abruptly. Sarah felt sick. This wasn't just about business competition anymore. It was about intimidation, possibly criminal conspiracy. Marcus watched the video, twice before speaking. "This changes everything. If we can authenticate this footage and identify the other speaker, we have evidence of criminal activity. But how do we use it without revealing the source? If this came from Elena or another insider, it could put them in danger." Before Marcus could answer, Amanda Kim appeared at Sarah's window looking frantic. "Did you see the video?" she asked breathlessly. "How did you—" "Anonymous tip to my editor an hour ago. Sarah, this footage, if it's authentic, shows criminal conspiracy. But I need your permission to publish it." Sarah looked between Marcus and Amanda. The video could destroy Richard completely, but using it meant escalating beyond civil litigation into criminal territory. It also meant whoever sent it had risked everything to expose the truth. "There's something else," Amanda continued. "My editor got 3 more anonymous tips this morning. Financial records, internal memos, evidence of bribes to city officials. Someone inside Blackstone is systematically exposing everything." Marcus's expression was grim. "Sarah, if you authorize releasing this video, there's no going back. This becomes a criminal matter. The FBI will get involved. Your civil case becomes secondary to a federal investigation." Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see reporters setting up cameras. In 30 minutes, she would walk into that courtroom and face Richard Blackstone for the final time in their legal battle. She could stick to the civil case, hope David Chen's testimony was enough, and try to rebuild her life quietly. Or she could authorize Amanda to publish evidence that would likely destroy Richard, but drag everyone into a much darker and more dangerous fight. Sarah thought about Elena in the hospital, about the architects whose careers had been systematically destroyed, about David Chen being pressured to lie. She thought about the person brave enough to risk everything by secretly recording Richard and sharing the evidence. "Publish it," she said quietly. "All of it." As she walked toward the courthouse, Sarah realized she was no longer fighting just for her reputation or her business. She was fighting for everyone who'd been too afraid or too broken to fight back. The reckoning had begun. The courthouse erupted in chaos as Amanda's second article went live during the lunch recess. Sarah watched from the steps as reporters' phones buzzed simultaneously, their expressions shifting from routine boredom to electric excitement. The anonymous video had been authenticated by digital forensics experts in record time. Richard Blackstone's voice discussing criminal conspiracy was now public record. "Sarah," a reporter thrust a microphone toward her face. "How does it feel to be vindicated?" She pushed past without answering, Marcus flanking her as they fought through the crowd. Inside, the courthouse hummed with whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word traveled fast in legal circles. Judge Patricia Hawthorne called the court to order, her expression stern as she surveyed the packed courtroom. Blackstone's legal team occupied 2 full tables, while Richard himself sat rigid in an expensive suit, his face a mask of controlled fury. For the first time in months, Sarah felt she was looking at him as an equal rather than a victim. "Given the developments in the press today," Judge Hawthorne began, "I want to address the elephant in this courtroom. Mr. Blackstone, are you aware?" that federal authorities have expressed interest in these proceedings? Richard's lead attorney, Jonathan Price, stood quickly. Your Honor, we move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against our client. The plaintiff has clearly orchestrated a media campaign designed to prejudice these proceedings. Sit down, Mr. Price. The judge's voice cut like ice. I've reviewed the Tribune articles and the evidence they cite. None of it appears to have been leaked from these proceedings. She fixed her gaze on Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, did you or your legal team provide the Financial Tribune with any documents or recordings related to this case? Sarah stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. No, Your Honor. I provided no evidence to Ms. Kim beyond my own testimony about my experiences. Your Honor, Price interrupted, we have reason to believe. You have suspicions, Counselor, not evidence. Judge Hawthorne's patience was clearly wearing thin. Unless you can prove tampering with this court's processes, we'll proceed with the scheduled testimony. David Chen took the stand first, his testimony devastating in its simplicity. The Morrison Hotel project delays had been orchestrated through Richard's connections at the city planning office. The permits that should have taken 2 weeks were deliberately held for months. Sarah's contract termination had been based on manufactured delays, not any professional failing. Mr. Blackstone personally called me, David testified, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. He said he'd taught that ambitious architect a lesson about overreaching. He seemed proud of what he'd done. Cross-examination revealed that David had recordings of his own, voicemails from Richard boasting about manipulating the permit process. The evidence was devastating and entirely independent of Elena's stolen documents. When Richard finally took the stand, the man who had systematically destroyed careers appeared diminished. The anonymous video had shattered his carefully constructed public image, and his testimony felt defensive, evasive. Mr. Blackstone, Marcus began his cross-examination. You've heard testimony that you deliberately sabotaged the Morrison Hotel permits. Do you deny this? I deny any wrongdoing. Do you deny calling David Chen to boast about teaching that ambitious architect a lesson? Richard's jaw tightened. I may have expressed satisfaction that an incompetent contractor was removed from a project. An incompetent contractor who, as we've established, was delayed by your deliberate interference? Objection! Price rose, but his heart wasn't in it. Overruled. Marcus pressed forward. Mr. Blackstone, are you familiar with architects James Morrison, Linda Park, and Michael Santos? Sarah watched Richard's face carefully. The names were 3 of the architects Amanda had interviewed for her article, all victims of Blackstone's systematic retaliation campaigns. I may have had professional dealings with them. Professional dealings that resulted in all 3 leaving the architecture profession entirely? Richard's composure finally cracked. The architecture industry is competitive. Not everyone is cut out for it. Including Ms. Mitchell, in your opinion? Ms. Mitchell overestimated her abilities and blamed others for her failures. Marcus smiled, the expression of a lawyer who'd just been handed a gift. Mr. Blackstone, if Ms. Mitchell failed due to her own incompetence, why did you need to manipulate city permits to create those failures? The courtroom fell silent. Richard's face flushed as he realized he'd walked into a trap. The delays were coincidental. Coincidental delays that you bragged about creating? Your Honor, Price stood desperately, but Judge Hawthorne waved him down. Answer the question, Mr. Blackstone. The pause stretched unbearably before Richard spoke, his voice barely audible. No further questions. During closing arguments, Marcus was masterful. He painted a picture of systematic abuse of power, of careers destroyed through deliberate manipulation, of a pattern of behavior that went far beyond normal business competition. Price's closing was listless, clearly undermined by his client's public disgrace, and the federal investigation that now loomed over everything. Judge Hawthorne deliberated for only 20 minutes. "In 30 years on the bench," she began when court reconvened, "I have rarely seen such a clear case of malicious defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. The evidence shows that Mr. Blackstone deliberately orchestrated delays on the Morrison Hotel project, then used those manufactured delays to justify terminating Ms. Mitchell's contract and damaging her professional reputation." Sarah felt Marcus squeeze her shoulder as the judge continued. "I find for the plaintiff on all counts. Mr. Blackstone, you are ordered to pay compensatory damages of $2, $3 million punitive damages of $5 million, and to publish a full retraction and apology in the architectural trade publications where you damaged Ms. Mitchell's reputation." The courtroom erupted. Richard slumped in his chair while his attorneys frantically scribbled notes about appeals. Sarah felt a strange emptiness where months of anger and fear had lived. As they exited the courthouse, Sarah was surrounded by reporters and well-wishers. The vindication felt surreal after months of doubt and struggle. "Sarah," Amanda Kim pushed through the crowd. "How does it feel to have won?" Sarah looked back at the courthouse steps where Richard Blackstone stood surrounded by his legal team. No longer the powerful figure who had nearly destroyed her life. He looked like what he'd always been, a bully whose victims had finally found their voice. "It feels like justice," she said. "Not just for me, but for everyone he hurt." As the crowd dispersed and the cameras packed up, Sarah realized that winning in court was only the beginning. The federal investigation would continue. Other victims would come forward. The architecture industry would be forced to confront uncomfortable truths about power and accountability. But for the first time in months, Sarah Mitchell could look toward the future without fear. She had not only survived Richard Blackstone's attempt to destroy her, she had exposed him for what he truly was. The reckoning was complete. Now came the rebuilding. 6 months after the verdict, Sarah stood in the lobby of her new office building, watching contractors install the frosted glass sign that read, "Mitchell and Associates, Architectural Design." The space was 3 times larger than her old office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's skyline. The irony wasn't lost on her. Richard Blackstone's malice had ultimately elevated her career beyond anything she might have achieved on her own. "The conference room furniture arrived this morning," called Elena from across the lobby. She'd joined Sarah's firm as a senior project manager after Blackstone and Associates dissolved in spectacular fashion. The federal investigation had uncovered tax fraud, bribery, and racketeering charges that sent Richard to federal prison for 8 years. His empire had crumbled within months of the verdict. Sarah smiled, still adjusting to having employees again. Her practice had grown from the ashes of her reputation into something stronger and more principled than before. The Morrison Hotel project had been completed under her direction after David Chen rehired her firm. 3 other major projects had followed, all from clients who admired her resilience and integrity. "Sarah, you have a visitor," Elena said, gesturing toward the elevator bank. Amanda Kim emerged, looking professional in a navy blazer, carrying a folder and wearing the satisfied expression of a journalist with a story to tell. "Congratulations on the new office," Amanda said, glancing around the modern space. "It's a far cry from that coffee shop where we first met." "Coffee shop meetings seem like a lifetime ago," Sarah replied, leading Amanda to her corner office. Through the windows, the city sprawled endlessly, full of buildings she hoped to design. "Someday. What brings you here? Please tell me it's not another investigation." Amanda laughed, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "Actually, it's good news. Remember that anonymous source who provided the video evidence? The one who single-handedly destroyed Richard's defense?" Sarah leaned forward. The identity of the whistleblower had remained a mystery throughout the investigation and trial. "You found out who it was?" "She found me." Amanda opened her folder, revealing a business card and a photograph. Margaret Blackstone, Richard's ex-wife. Sarah stared at the photo, an elegant woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a chignon. His ex-wife? Divorced him 3 years ago after discovering his affairs and business practices. She'd been documenting his corruption for years, planning to use it in the divorce proceedings. When she read about your case, she realized she could do more than just protect her financial interests. She could stop him from destroying more lives. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical force. Richard's own ex-wife had been the anonymous insider, the person who'd risked everything to expose his crimes. Why didn't she come forward during the trial? She was terrified he'd retaliate against their children, but after the federal charges were filed and he was in custody, she decided to tell her story. Amanda pulled out a manuscript from her folder. She's written a book about their marriage and his business practices. Publishers are in a bidding war for it. Sarah shook her head in amazement. So, the video that destroyed his case was recorded by his own wife, using security cameras he'd installed in his office. She had access to everything: financial records, recorded conversations, evidence of bribes and extortion going back a decade. Amanda's grin was infectious. Richard Blackstone was brought down by the woman he underestimated most. A knock on the door interrupted them. Marcus Webb entered, looking more relaxed than Sarah had seen him in years. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and he carried himself with renewed confidence. The Blackstone case had elevated his own practice significantly. "Amanda, good to see you," Marcus said, settling into the remaining chair. "Sarah, I have updates on the restitution payments. Richard's assets are being liquidated faster than expected. You should receive the full judgment amount within the next 3 months." Sarah nodded, though the money felt less important now than it had during the dark months of litigation. What about the other victims? The architects whose careers he destroyed? Margaret Blackstone's evidence has opened the door for them to file their own suits. The federal prosecutors are also considering a victim compensation fund. Marcus pulled out his tablet, scrolling through legal documents. James Morrison has already filed. Linda Park is considering it. Michael Santos is dead, Sarah finished quietly. Suicide, 2 years ago. Richard's campaign destroyed him completely. The room fell silent. Despite their victory, the human cost of Richard's cruelty couldn't be undone. Sarah thought often about Michael Santos, about the architects who disappeared from the profession rather than fight back, about the careers cut short by one man's malicious ambition. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The American Institute of Architects wants to honor you at their annual convention. They're creating an award for professional courage, the Sarah Mitchell Award for Architectural Integrity." Sarah felt overwhelmed. 6 months ago, she'd been a pariah in her own profession. Now they wanted to name an award after her. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Amanda interjected. "Your story inspired people to stand up to bullies in their own industries. The Tribune has received dozens of similar stories from other professions: lawyers being blackballed by powerful partners, doctors being driven out by hospital administrators, engineers being silenced by corrupt contractors. Your victory gave others hope." Through her office windows, Sarah could see construction cranes dotting the skyline, new buildings rising from foundations carefully planned and executed. The city was always growing, always becoming something new. Like her own life, she realized. "I'll accept the award," she said finally, "but only if they also create a fund to help other professionals fight back against retaliation and corruption." Michael Santos deserved to see justice too. Marcus made notes on his tablet while Amanda nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of legacy this story deserves. As the afternoon wound down and her visitors prepared to leave, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The naive architect who'd walked into Richard Blackstone's office a year ago was gone, replaced by someone harder but also more compassionate, more aware of the power structures that shaped their profession. Elena appeared in the doorway as Marcus and Amanda were leaving. "Sarah, your 4 o'clock appointment is here. The developers for the Phoenix Convention Center project." Sarah smiled. Another major project. Another chance to create something meaningful. But this time, she approached it with eyes wide open to the politics and personalities that could make or break a career. "Send them in," she said. As Elena left to escort the clients to the conference room, Sarah took a moment to look around her new office. The space was bright and modern, with clean lines and honest materials, everything she'd always tried to bring to her architecture. On her desk sat a framed photo from the AIA convention where she'd received her award, surrounded by colleagues who now looked at her with respect rather than pity. But the item she treasured most was a handwritten note from Richard Blackstone, thanking her for having the courage to fight back when others had been too afraid. It reminded Sarah that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for victory, but for the people who came after. Richard Blackstone had tried to destroy her, but in the end, he'd created something stronger. Sarah Mitchell had not only survived, she had transformed her profession's conversation about power, accountability, and courage. The future stretched ahead, full of buildings waiting to be designed and stories waiting to be told. Sarah Mitchell was ready for both. The Phoenix Convention Center gleamed in the desert sun, its angular glass facade catching the light like a crystalline mountain rising from the urban landscape. Sarah Mitchell stood before the completed building, her latest and most ambitious project, as photographers captured the moment for Architectural Digest's cover story. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same magazine that had once printed Richard Blackstone's lies about her incompetence was now featuring her work as revolutionary civic architecture. The integration of sustainable technology with classical proportions represents a new paradigm in public building design, the interviewer was saying, his voice barely audible over the construction noise from the adjacent lot where another, Mitchell & Associates project, was rising. Sarah nodded politely, but her attention was drawn to a familiar figure approaching across the plaza. Amanda Kim, now the Financial Tribune's senior investigative editor, walked toward them with the measured pace of someone carrying important news. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Amanda said to the photographer, "but I need to steal Ms. Mitchell for a moment." They walked to a quiet corner of the plaza where Amanda pulled out her phone. "I wanted you to hear this directly from me. Richard Blackstone was found dead in his cell this morning." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. After 3 years of appeals, federal investigations, and civil suits, Richard had become a distant figure, more symbol than person. His death felt surreal, anticlimactic. How? Apparent suicide. He'd been receiving death threats from other inmates after a documentary about white-collar crime featured his case. Prison officials had him in protective custody, but Amanda shrugged helplessly. "The investigation is ongoing." Sarah stared across the plaza at families entering the convention center, children running between the sculptural elements she'd designed to encourage play and exploration. Life continuing normally while somewhere across the country, the man who'd nearly destroyed her had ended his own life. "How do you feel about it?" Amanda asked gently. Sarah considered the question seriously. 3 years ago, she might have felt vindicated, even satisfied. Now she felt only sadness. For Richard Blackstone and their children, for the architects whose careers he'd destroyed, for the waste of a brilliant mind corrupted by ego and cruelty. "Hollow," she said finally. "I wanted him to live long enough to understand what he'd done to people. Death feels like escape." Amanda nodded, making notes on her phone. "I'm writing his obituary." The Tribune wants it to be fair but honest about his crimes. Would you like to comment? Before Sarah could answer, Elena appeared at her elbow, slightly out of breath from rushing across the plaza. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a development with the Seattle project. The clients are here unexpectedly, and they want to discuss modifications to the residential tower design. Sarah looked between Amanda and Elena, caught between her past and her future. The Seattle project was a mixed-use development that would house low-income families alongside market-rate units. Exactly the kind of socially conscious architecture she'd committed to pursuing after her victory over Richard. Go, Amanda said, understanding immediately. This story is about the past. That building is about the future. As Sarah and Elena walked back toward the convention center, Elena spoke quietly. I heard about Richard. Are you okay? I think so. Sarah paused at the building's entrance, looking up at the soaring glass atrium that flooded the interior with natural light. You know what's strange? I spent so much energy hating him, and now that he's gone, I just feel empty. Maybe that's healthy, Elena suggested. Maybe it means you've moved past what he did to you. Inside the convention center, Sarah was struck by the vibrancy of the space. Families explored interactive exhibits. Teenagers clustered around video displays. Elderly couples sat on the custom-designed benches she'd positioned to encourage lingering and conversation. The building was alive in ways she'd only dreamed of during the design process. Marcus Webb waited near the information desk with a group of well-dressed executives, the Seattle development team. He'd aged well in the 3 years since the trial, his success as Sarah's primary legal counsel opening doors to corporate clients in high-profile cases. The Blackstone victory had made his reputation as much as Sarah's. Sarah, these are the principals from Emerald City Development, Marcus said, making introductions. They've seen the Phoenix project and want to discuss accelerating the Seattle timeline. As Sarah shook hands with the developers, she noticed a young woman standing slightly apart from the group. Early 30s, with the eager expression of someone new to the profession, clutching a portfolio that marked her as an architect. This is Jennifer Santos, one of the developers said, noticing Sarah's attention. She'll be the project manager if we move forward. Fresh graduate from the University of Washington, top of her class. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Santos. The young woman stepped forward, her voice steady despite obvious nervousness. Michael Santos was my older brother. I know what happened to him, what Blackstone did. When I heard you were the architect on this project, I specifically requested to be assigned to it. Sarah felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Michael Santos, the architect who'd committed suicide after Richard destroyed his career, had a sister who'd followed him into the profession. The cycle of architecture continued, but this time with knowledge of its dangers. Jennifer, Sarah said carefully, I want you to know that your brother was talented. What happened to him wasn't his fault. Tears gathered in Jennifer's eyes. I know. I've read everything about the case, the investigation, the other victims. I became an architect partly to honor his memory, but also because your victory showed me it was possible to fight back. The Seattle development meeting lasted 2 hours, but Sarah found herself studying Jennifer throughout the presentation. The young woman was sharp, asking intelligent questions about sustainable materials and community integration. She had her brother's passion for architecture, but seemed better equipped to navigate the profession's political realities. As the meeting concluded and hands were shaken on a preliminary agreement, Jennifer approached Sarah privately. I have a favor to ask, she said, pulling a business card from her portfolio. I'm starting a nonprofit, the Michael Santos Foundation for Architectural Justice. We want to provide legal support and advocacy for architects facing retaliation or discrimination. Would you consider joining our advisory board? Sarah looked at the card, seeing Michael's name in elegant typography below the foundation's mission statement. The work would never bring him back, but it might prevent others from suffering his fate. "I'd be honored," Sarah said. As the Seattle team departed and the convention center began its evening transition, Sarah found herself alone in the building she'd designed. The space felt different in the fading light, more contemplative, more introspective. She walked through the main hall, noting how families still lingered despite the late hour, reluctant to leave the welcoming environment she'd created. Her phone buzzed with messages, condolences about Richard's death, congratulations on the Seattle project, interview requests from journalists wanting her reaction to her former adversary's suicide. She turned the phone off and sat on one of her custom benches, watching the last visitors explore the building. Richard Blackstone was dead, but his legacy lived on in the changes his corruption had forced upon their profession. New ethical guidelines, victim support funds, whistleblower protections, all born from the investigation his crimes had triggered. Margaret Blackstone's book had become a bestseller, inspiring victims in other industries to come forward. The Sarah Mitchell Award had been given to 12 architects who'd shown courage in fighting professional retaliation. Most importantly, Jennifer Santos was designing buildings instead of mourning her brother's lost dreams. 3 years ago, Sarah had entered this battle seeking only to clear her name and save her career. She was leaving it as someone who'd helped transform an entire profession's relationship with power and accountability. The naive architect who'd trusted Richard Blackstone was gone, replaced by someone who understood that creating beautiful buildings was only part of an architect's responsibility. As she walked toward the exit, Sarah reflected on the strange mathematics of justice. Richard's death didn't feel like victory. It felt like the final period on a long, painful sentence that had already been written. The real victory was the building around her, humming with life and possibility, and the knowledge that somewhere in Seattle, Jennifer Santos was sketching plans for a better world. The future stretched ahead, full of buildings waiting to be designed and young architects needing guidance. Sarah Mitchell was ready for both, carrying forward the lessons learned from her darkest year into whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside, the Phoenix sunset painted the convention center's glass facade in shades of gold and crimson. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever built. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.